The Frontline podcast is brought to you by Legion Technologies. Hourly employees want and need flexibility and predictability. They desire more connection and belonging with their peers and companies. And businesses want to maximize productivity while enhancing employee engagement to reduce turnover. Who said we can't have it all? The Frontline podcast is focused on discussing the challenges that come along with having an hourly workforce and shedding light on these important employees who are so often overlooked. You'll hear from leaders bringing transformational and innovative change to their organizations and ways you can improve your own experience and the experiences of your employees, no matter where you sit in your organization. At Legion, we believe that AI-powered workforce management solves these challenges. I'm your host, Tracy Chernoff, Director of Employee Engagement at Legion Technologies, and the host of the podcast, Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources. Be sure to subscribe to the Frontline podcast. Learn more at legion.co. Follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn, and get ready to be part of the solution. Welcome back to the Frontline podcast. Thank you so much for being here for another month, another episode. With me, I have Michael Spataro, and I'm really excited. We're talking all about holiday staffing and demand forecasting and everything that you need to know about how workforce sharing and demand forecasting are actually the gifts that keep on giving. So, Michael, welcome to the podcast. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're currently located, and what you do?
Certainly. So I am the Chief Customer Officer here at Legion. My team is responsible for all the interactions we have with our customers, from implementation to customer support, as well as the customer success management team. My entire career has been based in retail, initially on the customer side for a couple of different retailers, but probably the largest span of time was with the Gap for about 13 years. Then I went into software and spent 17 years with a competitor of Legion, then some independent consulting in the area of workforce management, and then joined Legion a year ago. So, my expertise is in the customer side as well as the software side. It's a good balance of really understanding the customer's needs as it relates to workforce management and how technology can solve for those needs.
Awesome. So you shared a little bit about your career journey already, starting off in retail, spending a number of years there, and then kind of migrating into this space. But can you share a little bit about how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, I think, it's interesting. I think in today's world, there's a significant opportunity within the retail environment for employees to really understand that retail can be a career. That you can grow and evolve within the organization you are, or find opportunities that relate to retail. So I think it's really important, especially in today's world, that companies are helping their employees to understand that this doesn't have to be a temporary job, that it can be a career. And my own personal experience was really growing within that retail environment and really understanding a variety of experiences. So I worked in stores, and then I worked in corporate. And when I was in corporate, I worked for a specific division of Gap before I went into IT and a shared services model. So I had a pretty vast level of experience cross-functionally within a retail environment. So when it was time to move on from that experience, I really looked at where can I leverage my expertise from a retail perspective, but do something different than be in a retail environment. And that's how I ended up in software. I'm a pretty determined and passionate individual that's very focused on making sure that we're driving success for our customers. And a lot of that is really what propelled me to continue to grow and evolve, in my career.
Amazing. So this is a perfect segue, I think, to talk about what we shared in last month's episode, which is really about the ROI of demand forecasting. The conclusion from that episode was really that demand forecasting is hugely impactful on a business's ability to meet customer demand while also ensuring employee experience remains a top priority. So considering all of the discussions about how inflation and lingering supply chain challenges are significantly affecting this year's Q4 for retailers, which we are in the midst of. Can you elaborate on the ways in which demand forecasting can support and improve holiday business and staffing?
So, this holiday, if you really think about the last 3 years, right, we've gone through a global pandemic, and what we saw in 2020 and 2021 was significant volatility. It was very unpredictable. So as we move into the end of 2022 and 2023, forecasting is critically important. The ability to not only look at the historical data points, but really what's happening with the actual data points, and merging those together to better predict what your next week's sales are going to be. It is critically important that the entire workforce management process begins with the right level of forecasting. Without the right level of forecasting, right, you're not going to get the right amount of labor, and nor are you going to get the schedule necessary to support your employee needs as well as your customer needs. So demand forecasting has become so much more critical in light of the history that we've gone through over the last 3 or 4 years.
Totally. Thank you for sharing that, and especially with someone like you having a background in retail. You also know I have a background in retail. Anyone listening knows that by now. What are some of the biggest challenges that retailers are faced with this holiday season when it comes to staffing and meeting demands? And what do employees expect from their employers?
Yeah, so the employee has become in the power position, right? So the employees aren't expecting things from their employer; they're demanding things from their employer, right? Mm-hmm. Gig-like flexibility is critically important to employees. 40% of employees surveyed in our workforce management survey basically said they were stressed about their ability to have the right work-life balance. So when we really, when we think about the challenge for retail, it's how do I recruit the right people, right? How do I hire the right people? Mm-hmm. How do I retain the right people? And the way you retain them is by providing them with that gig-like flexibility where they can balance their work-life needs. So giving them the ability to swap shifts and almost giving them the ability to create their own schedule by giving them a schedule and then having them have the ability to flex. When it comes to recruiting or becoming the employer of choice, it really is about marketing some of those gig-like tools so when we think about Legion specifically, when we think about the mobile app and all of the capabilities that are within our mobile application, there are retailers, our specific customers, that use that as a recruiting tool. So the ability for an employee to create their own schedule or modify their schedule to create the right work-life balance, right, is a competitive advantage. And that's going to be critically important to attracting those employees, but it's also critically important in retaining those employees. You have to enable those employees to interact with their employer in the same way they interact with their everyday life, right? And that is through a mobile device.
Absolutely.
We need to be able to communicate to those employees. We need to be able to give them the flexibility that they need. And we have to do all of that, but we also then have to create the right customer experience. So retailers are really in a difficult position as it relates to how do I balance those two needs? How do I give my employees all the flexibility they demand, but at the same time provide the exceptional experience for the customer so that they're going to continue to shop and return to that retailer.
Absolutely. This is a really good point. And thank you for sharing the results of the survey. Also, this is, this survey we've run now for a number of years, and looking at the trends between last year and this year's survey, it's really interesting because actually not surprising at all that the trends really are the same. that employees do want more and expect more from their employers. And actually, it's really interesting. You might have read this yourself, that there are employers in the UK that now are turning to a 4-day work week without any cut in pay, without any added hours in the day, just that 32 hours divided within 4 days. And there are a lot of people in the, the sphere of work and HR and operations that are saying, well, how is this possible? How can you possibly go from 5 days a week to 4 days a week? Doesn't that impact the business? Doesn't that impact productivity? But the reality is that these businesses are actually showing that their employees at some level were expecting a different type of schedule, a different type of flexibility in their week. And from what I have read, those businesses have not seen any change in their profits or in productivity from the employees. So it's really interesting. Obviously, we're talking about retail, and those businesses are not retailers that I'm referencing. But when we think about the relationship between those businesses that have been running this test, and there are businesses in New Zealand that have been doing this as well, that have seen the same results. But looking at retail, I mean, retail is the one business that everyone can agree is, can tend to be volatile, changes every single day. You and I both know that one day in a store, it could be like a year. And that experience is for sure unique to retail. But the reality is that in that understanding of how that business operates, employees demanding and expecting a different type of work can only mean that if you're meeting those needs, that you're also driving better retention, which is one of the greatest challenges for a retailer.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think that we really need to think differently about, how we go about hiring and retaining employees. When we think about the pre-pandemic period, these employees felt like they were taken advantage of by their retailers, their employers, and here we are 3 years later, and those employees want to be treated with respect, and they want to ensure that they're having the best possible experience with their employer. And like I said, I think it's a struggle for retailers to figure out how to provide that right balance, have the great employee experience as well as the great customer experience. But I do think it is really about ensuring that you're giving those employees the opportunities to grow and develop. Right? Don't necessarily hire somebody to just be a salesperson. Right? Why? They want to grow their skills and experience. So how do you enable them to understand how all the different aspects of the store work? But also realizing that one of the challenges you have is it's going to be difficult to hire enough people just to run your store. So how do you leverage your employees across locations, right? Mm-hmm. That is another advantage to enabling employees to grow and develop. The fact that they can work in one store today and a different store tomorrow is going to give them a different experience. But it also is going to help that employer ensure that they can meet the customer demands. So we're in a very challenging position, but it's not insurmountable. I do think there is a path to providing the right balance. My fear is if we don't find that path, we will see more unionization occurring. We're starting to see that in retail today because, again, employees are demanding expectations from their employer. And if they don't feel like that employer is providing it, then they're looking for an alternative. And that's where unionization is starting to get some momentum in retail. For
sure. And, I don't know that we really dove into unionization before, but, I think, from a neutral perspective, the reality is that when people do engage in labor relations and unionize or explore that, it's usually a reflection of disengagement at the employee level and a feeling of not being heard. And from my experience, having had experience managing a union environment and non-union environments at the same time, there is a difference when it comes to a business really being able to work directly with an employee. Things are a little bit different when it comes down to having to work with a union representative. So there are a lot of things to consider there, and businesses do need to be really mindful of staying focused on what drives engagement. That is the best way to make sure that you are maintaining a direct conversation with your employees, if that is the direction that you want to go in as a business. And certainly, I'm sure that there are industries that really benefit from having union representation. The challenge, I think, with retail is that you have a population of mostly hourly employees who are, potentially looking to get a start in management or get exposure in different areas. And when there is a sense of disengagement, it can spread really, really quickly. So actually, coming back to this point, and actually I'm glad that we're talking about engagement and workforce sharing. You touched on workforce sharing in terms of how employees can work across locations and that businesses can leverage that strategy to improve their staffing, to elevate the compensation of their employees, to improve the engagement of their employees. So with holiday staffing, of course, this holiday staffing, for anyone that doesn't know, this can begin in the summer months. Like most of the time, depending on the size of retailer or the size of business, you're starting to think about and staff up for holiday sometimes in the beginning to the middle of the summer, because it takes quite a lot of time to get the number of employees that you need in your store. So obviously understanding that the months leading up to the holiday season that staffing can also last well beyond February. And depending on the region in which the store is located, like for example, if you're in the South or specifically in Florida, the holiday season can sometimes last until March. So understanding that this is dependent on retailer and region, everyone kind of has to do what is unique to them. But at the same time, the answers and the advice I think that we're kind of touching on is pretty clear, that there are ways that business leaders can take action today to meet their holiday staffing needs while also elevating employee engagement. And so you touched on this with workforce sharing, but can we dive in a little bit deeper and really, for those who don't understand what workforce sharing is, better explain what that can look like, whether it's a small, medium to large scale retailer, and how that really does drive employee engagement, better profits, reduced, payroll costs, and all of those things in between.
Yeah. So, staffing, you might say the, great resignation is trailing off. And it might be. And what I mean by that is fewer people are leaving their jobs. However, there's still a staffing problem across retail, right? These are jobs, again, that historically employees felt like they were a little bit taken advantage of. So, during the pandemic, those employees may have found other opportunities, and they're not coming back to retail. So how do I do more with less, right? How do I focus on being productive and efficient with the employees that I do have? That's going to be the big focus, because the reality is the likelihood of you being able to staff to your true demand for holiday is very unlikely, because again, right, the resources just aren't there. So what we really need to be focusing on is, how do we maximize, again, the productivity and efficiency of those the employees we do have. And one of the ways to maximize that productivity and efficiency is, if I'm a retailer and I have multiple brands, every one of those brands is going to do shipment processing, right? A truck's going to come and goods are going to get delivered, and those goods need to be processed. So instead of having, a stocking team in, every one of your locations in a mall, why not have a stocking team that goes from brand to brand to brand and completes that task, right? So, if you have 4 different brands in a single mall, that stocking crew can do stocking on Monday in one brand and Tuesday. It's the same group. They're just moving to a different location. Same thing with the staffing of the store. When creating that schedule, you can create right, if employees want to work across multiple locations, they can identify what locations they'll work in, and when we create the schedule, those employees can be scheduled in their home store or the other stores based on the demand. That's going to be critically important to retailers broadly, because again, you're not going to get in a position where you can hire all the bodies you need for holiday. So cross-store scheduling will be incredibly valuable, whether that's in a single mall location, or if you're a Home Depot and the ability to the stores are close enough in proximity where employees can work across multiple locations, and that's going to be critically important to meeting the needs of our customers.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think this is like the quote unquote next frontier, right? Like you're right that the pool to pick from in terms of staffing is the same size, if not smaller, because of those who left retail during the pandemic. And, we at some level, retailers do need to further incentivize. It is not easy being an in-store employee, being a frontline worker. I mean, not only are you dealing with the pressures and challenges of the store demands, but you're also dealing with the pressures and challenges of customer demands. And that is, I think we see it all the time on memes, and we hear about this all the time, that every single person in the world should work a retail job once in their lives, or a hospitality job once in their lives, in order to really understand patience and kindness and respect. Because I'm sure that you can double down on this too, but I can speak from personal experience that it is not easy to be a frontline employee in that way, and having to balance all of those things. And, especially you add on the stress of holiday shopping for folks, it's not always a pleasant experience for a frontline worker. So how do retailers make those experiences that people feel excited to have and that they want to have in their lives? So, I think I've mentioned it on the podcast before that spreading the age range too, and expanding where we're looking for staffing from is also a huge component to this, to broadening the pool. But you can't just bring people in, you have to also meet their needs. So finally, my last question focused on the frontline worker for you is really focused on this challenge. So of course, being a frontline worker, we've mentioned this already, it's extremely challenging, and it's challenging every day, and it changes every day. So you also have that challenge added on, but especially during the holiday season, as I've already elaborated on, that is exceptionally challenging. So what can business leaders do to better engage and support their employees during this time? And how do they do it beyond the holiday season?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things. One, it's no longer about paying people enough money to work at a retailer, right? It's about providing them. It's about meeting their needs, and their needs are broad, right? So their needs could go so far as the gig-like flexibility. One of the things that we're seeing grow is the ability to have instant access to wages, right, as a need. What employers really need to do is ensure that they're providing the best experience for that employee, and thinking more broadly about that experience. What are you doing during the workday to ensure that the employee is having the best possible experience with you, both when they're interacting with the customer and not? So I think one of the things employers need to think about is, how do they create an experience for that employee that gives them a little bit more balance, even when they're in the store? And what I mean by that is, when people are taking breaks, buying lunches, doing things that show that you believe that employee is really valuable to you as an organization. I also think it's really understanding that employee, right? How often do we actually have conversations with that employee about what their needs are, what they want out of their experience? I also think it's about, right, especially with Gen Z. They're looking to work for an employer that shares their goals and values. So how do you engage employees in some of those shared values, and that might be like finding a charity that everyone can contribute to in some meaningful way, where they feel like not only are they working in the environment, but they're also giving back, and they're giving back with the partnership of that employer. So those are the type of things you want to think about as you especially work through the next several weeks. It's not just about ensuring that your employees' needs and your customer needs are being met. It's about creating the best experience for that employee, and really think about creative ways to do that, especially over the next 5 or 6 weeks.
That's super helpful and really insightful. I appreciate so much you sharing your insights and information and your experience also having been in retail. So I ask every guest on the podcast the same concluding takeaway question, so that we can kind of round out all of this advice that you've given all the listeners. So that question is, what is the best advice that you have received and that you continue to live by? And this can be advice in your work or personal life.
Yeah, so it's really simple. I live by a simple motto: love what you do or don't do it. If you enjoy, I have every career change I've made was because I got to the point where I wasn't loving what I was doing. If I wake up every day and I'm excited about going to work, then I'm loving what I'm doing. There's no one that is really having the best possible experience if they're not enjoying what they're doing every day. So that's a motto that I kind of live by as it relates to the work that I do, or the things that I do in my personal life is love what you do or don't do it.
Love it. Thank you so much. It's a great piece of advice for everyone, and I think everyone should live by that. So thank you so much, Michael, for joining the podcast, and again, for shedding some light on this really important topic. And for anyone that wants to connect with Michael, we'll have all of the information on how to do so in the show notes. Thank you so much, and tune in for the next episode, which will be the first episode of 2023. Thank you so much again, Michael, for being on the show.
Thank you, Tracy. Have a great day.